Let's get into this, but first, can you both introduce yourselves? We'll start off with New Gen because you are bringing the argument that we should force the vote. Please say who you are and give a little bit of a statement on why you think forcing the vote is the right idea. Then we'll go to Leftward.
Okay. Yeah, my name's Jonathan Garden. I'm just some dude in Springfield, Missouri that believes in populism and human rights. And I mean, basically the argument that I was laying out where it's in historical context, the strategic thing to do. And power concedes nothing without a demand. And anyone who thinks otherwise is pretty silly because either political party and either branch of leadership are going to concede nothing without being forced to.
All right,
Okay, Leftward.
My name is Ardian. My channel is called Leftward Bound. I'm a centrist hack like David Sirota in Texas. And my main argument here, so I am progressive, is that force the vote shouldn't be the center focus of our strategy as progressives whenever it comes to Medicare for all and getting concessions from Pelosi. I don't think it's an inherently bad idea, but it's just a really low priority.
Okay. Can I ask you what you would prioritize? I mean, obviously, looking at the polling data, you made a good argument when I came on the show last time about the public option debate versus Medicare for all. Is there something that you lean to as the natural kind of policy that could coalesce a progressive movement and actually create a national pressure campaign on our politicians?
So with Medicare for all, I just think that there are more strategic ways to go about it. So one thing that is more realistic right now is you could have progressives force Pelosi to remove Richie Neal, who's the head of the Ways and Means Committee, right? Mm-hmm. And that is the committee that's ultimately going to determine funding for Medicare for all if it ever becomes a serious policy. Instead, you force her to remove him, right? And then as a result of seniority, Lloyd Doggett becomes the chair of that committee, and he's much more progressive. He didn't kill legislation on surprise medical billing, and he's also in favor of Medicare for all. So for me, I think that is more important. And here's why. Because we have to understand that whether we like it or not, independent media basically has no power right now. Corporate media, as we learned in the primaries, has the most power. And so if a vote on Medicare for all were to get forced, and that was our main strategy, and we put all of our eggs in that basket, or most of our eggs in that basket, that would get spun as Medicare for all in that basket isn't realistic. That would get and that's going to be the narrative. Because I know that this, no one really thinks that Medicare for all is going to pass, and a lot of this is about, oh, well, the theater behind it will be good. But in my opinion, I think that the noise around it might actually hurt us with the way things are now.
Okay. Well, I mean, again, you could make a case that maybe you think in the long run that Democrats are going to be hurt by Medicare for all, but the point that I made the last time I came on here was, despite the question of what they think is less pie in the sky, public option or Medicare for all, the overwhelming majority of the country supports it. They're not just going to see the demagoguing in the mainstream corporate media that's already done on Medicare for all and go, oh, they got me. Socialized medicine sucks. No, they're going to stand to their positions as typically people do, unless you give them a very good reason otherwise. So what I would like to respond, and correct me if I'm wrong here, you might know this. I'm pretty sure that it was Alex Morse that was running against Richie Neal. Didn't knock it off, but I wish he would have. Mm-hmm. But either way, no, I 100% concede that. In terms of the internal affairs, and this is where there's just a lot of ignorance because people don't know the system. And I've, checked out your channel a bit, so I, commend you for being someone that really gets into the nitty gritty of this stuff. And I think that's absolutely prevalent. I think we should absolutely strive to do that. But when I view what would be the center, just the same as the contract to America, right? What would be the center of this movement? I view that being behind Medicare for all because it's the most important policy to me. I think it's politically explosive. I think we view it as one of those things because there's so much propaganda in the press about it because, health insurance companies and pharmaceutical companies are just so powerful. Same thing as how environmental issues get torn because the fossil fuel companies are just so powerful. Drawing that line in the stand and letting the people know that you really stand with them and against the corporations, I in fact think that's politically explosive. And, same people when it comes to the Tea Party, when it comes to the Conservative Opportunity Party, when it comes to the Freedom Caucus now, they would say the same thing. Oh, they're saying all these radical things and they're sticking their necks out and they'll get primaried. But then they actually just gain members and they actually just win. And I want to win. So.
No, I mean, I want to win too. And let me just be clear about something. I prefer Medicare for all over a public option, and I think it's vastly superior. And I understand that it's also incredibly popular. I think my main concern has been the divisions that have been caused on the left by incredibly immature individuals. And I'm going to call them out, like Jimmy Dore, who I think is also a bad faith actor. Okay. I think there have been a lot of bad faith arguments here. So one thing that I saw, and I know that like we shouldn't always like focus on Twitter. Twitter isn't real life, but I guess in these circles, it has outsized importance. But I saw, for example, like Kyle Kulinski and some other progressives like bashing Pelosi for holding a unanimous consent vote on the stimulus bill, right? And they were acting as if she did that because she wanted to kill the bill. And that's not at all what happened. You hold a unanimous consent vote because if it passes, then that means like you don't have to worry about amendments, you don't have to worry about debates. It's the easiest way to get the bill through the process. And so there's been a lot of bad faith around that. There's also been a lot of bad faith around, for example,
is that really
Jimmy
bad faith? Like,
no, that is bad.
I hate to assume people's intentions. I don't think AOC is a bad faith actor. I think some of the shit Jimmy Dore says is dumb. I don't think he's a bad faith actor too. I think we all just want help here.
I just think though, look, whenever did you see his tirade against AOC and basically calling her a complete sellout? Yeah, I think
one-time wonder, and you've been pressured in, and you're part of them. And listen, that Washington brain, I think that's real. Like, I think once you're inside the system, you start thinking about it differently. But that doesn't necessarily mean they're malicious.
No, yeah, but I think that when someone uses that rhetoric and makes those baseless attacks, then suddenly that creates nihilism on the left, where we have actual people in power, right? Like AOC, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, Ro Khanna, who are incredibly effective. But we have to keep in mind that there aren't that many of them because right now there are only like a dozen Justice Democrats in the House, okay?
Yep. And but enough to make Pelosi not get elected.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's true. And then also, if you look at the total amounts that are in the Progressive Caucus, right, Congressional Progressive Caucus, and they're not all necessarily progressive, it's 94 out of almost 233. 100. Yeah, so it's at the end of the day, even then, we don't have a majority, right? We just have to keep it real on that front. We got a long ways to go. And so it doesn't make sense to undermine and launch these attacks and call these people sellouts who are some of the only people on the left who have been successful in recent times. And so
I was going to say, you just mentioned Kulinski, and he's someone that, I follow. Like, I'm 100% open about that. Yeah, I've learned a lot from him. I think I like, and I've tried to adopt some of the ways that he ties history back and makes things comprehensible. I think he's a good political commentator. When did he say that Pelosi doing the unanimous vote was a bad thing? He said, hey, listen, she called his bluff. And he thought that because a lot of times Democrats will walk the line with with Trump specifically, and it's hilarious. They'll make themselves end up looking like asshats when he'll flank them, and they'll argue against him, like Amy Klobuchar saying that wanting $2,000 checks a month was a crime against every American.
Oh yeah, no, that was completely ridiculous. But no,
I didn't see that from Kulinski.
Initially, what happened was, you're right. He said, and a lot of people on the left also like commended Pelosi for saying, okay, she called Trump's bluff awesome. Yeah. But that was before, the next day, I believe, where it went through unanimous consent, and then everyone was losing their minds. They're saying, why did she have it go through unanimous consent? And I'm like, they're still going to have a regular floor vote on Monday, but the idea is if it goes through unanimous consent, then you don't have to deal with, the amending of the bill and the debates that will follow once it actually has to go to a floor vote because it didn't pass unanimous consent. And I think Nancy Pelosi is incredibly flawed, but I see this trend on the left where people think she's like the devil incarnate, right? And
she just doesn't want to work with us on any of the things we care about, and her interests are diametrically opposed.
The thing is,
she's not Satan; she's just a corporatist.
Well, yeah, and look, I'm glad that you have that view. I think that's more of a rational view, to be honest. But what we have to keep in mind is that back in May, the House did pass a stimulus bill that extended the $600 a week unemployment benefits. Yeah, and they also had $2,000 monthly checks in there. That was back in May. And so ultimately, that was the Republicans who opposed it in the Senate, right? So I think there's this issue of saying like, oh, well, Democrats are being outflanked by Republicans on the left. No, Democrats are not being outflanked by Republicans on the left. Sure, Trump said, let's have $2,000 checks, but the House already voted on that back in May. You know what I mean? And even right now, like Trump is doing this because, and look, I hope somehow it works out, but he's doing it because he probably wants to get back at McConnell because McConnell did the radical thing of recognizing Joe Biden as the next president of the United States, right? Like that, and I think it's important to keep that in mind, right?
Yeah, no, I definitely think that's a good perspective. And it's the same thing, like, for example, AOC, one of her off the bat arguments, and like, listen, I feel like, and maybe this is a political maturity thing. I don't think this is really an ideology thing, but I am literally aggressively the first one that is willing to criticize any of the people that I look up to and care about if I see them acting in ways in which I don't think the principles that they've set out and that I've tried to learn from show. So it's like, for example, whenever Bernie, in my view, was not fighting the establishment hard enough, not making the like easy comparisons that he needed to, you know, Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, or Joe Biden to Hillary Clinton and to the status quo, I criticized him for that. And listen, I think Bernie's intentions, he's been fighting for us for 50 years. What else do you want? You know, but I do want more. That's the point, because again, we want to win. So listen, I 100% agree with you. I'm not for taking pot shots at leftists. I am for calling leftists out if I think that I'm right and they're wrong, and trying to drag them to my side if that's what it means, and really hash these things out. But no, I don't think AOC is a bad faith actor. I did see Jamal Bowman and Cori Bush, who it feels good because that's the first, you know, from the squad from my home state of Missouri. They should have said hell no, but what they said was they would not commit to voting for Pelosi. Like, listen, guys, you might not like to admit it, but it's more than Dore, and I don't give a shit about Jimmy Dore. This has built into something that's bigger. And same thing, Ilhan Omar said, yeah, let's get Medicare for all on the floor. What? You think that would be bad for Democrats in the long run? Why?
Here's the thing, though.
A year before we actually got women the right to vote, it got crushed.
So if the Democrats, right, and this is super important in terms of strategy. I don't know, honestly, because I feel like I need to know what's happening internally right now. None of us know that. But the progressives need to have a viable candidate who is running against Pelosi for speaker. Because if they don't, right, which they probably don't, okay, just looking at the actual numbers right now, just going to keep
people don't really want to step up and stick their neck out as much as they should. But
well, it's also kind of like a numbers game at this point, to be honest. I think that, like I said,
it only takes one person to, you know, run someone else against her, though. Just one person.
Yeah, well, I think the concern would be if the vote gets split and then let's say only two remain, that it most likely would be Pelosi and someone who's more conservative than her, and then eventually...
And then you vote no on both.
And then what do you do after that?
That's exactly what you do. You let the system crumble under itself, because as an anti-establishment candidate, you gain power from the system crumbling. So you point out how incompetent it is, and you reiterate why you won't vote for it.
I really don't think that's a smart thing to do during a pandemic depression, whenever people need relief. They need more substantive relief, which it might not be the amount that we get. But
this legislation, I'm saying, don't renominate her speaker.
But my point is, someone's eventually going to have to be speaker if we want anything to pass through the House. And it most likely would be Pelosi, if not Pelosi, someone more conservative than her, right? It would probably be Hakeem Jeffries, who's her successor. And one thing we have to keep in mind, I just want to make a quick comparison between Hakeem Jeffries and Nancy Pelosi. So I looked this up today on Open Secrets, and Nancy Pelosi, a lot of people think, and I agree to a certain extent, is beholden to the interests of corporations. That's a fair criticism.
Wow,
however,
really?
No, it's true, but I went on Open Secrets and I saw that she gets 55%, a little over 55% of her donations from small dollar donors, people making $200 or less. For Hakeem Jeffries, do you know how much that is? It's a little over 3%. And the main industry that contributes to his campaign are banks, right? Whereas for Pelosi, it's retiree organizations and then Democratic Party organizations. The actual big corporations are much lower on that list as compared to Hakeem Jeffries. So Hakeem Jeffries writes, he most likely would become speaker if not Pelosi, and he is worse than her, and we have to keep that in mind, all right? Because right now we truly do not have the numbers to have a progressive, someone to the left of Pelosi, to become speaker. And right now we have to focus on obviously building up our coalition, but also making sure that no matter what, the top priority should be getting real relief passed under a Biden administration that's vastly superior to what we've got under Trump, because people are desperately hurting.
Well, Joe Biden is who Joe Biden is. He's not going left. But
no, Joe Biden is who Joe Biden is, but I think
he's not going left, dog.
It's important to keep something in mind. All right.
Yeah. We can try to push him left, and that's a fair argument. That's what I'm trying to do right now.
I'm looking at Joe Biden's cabinet, right? And there are some progressive nominees. So I'm looking at, for example, like Health and Human Services Secretary.
I covered it.
Sara.
Good on the 2008 Great Recession. Yeah.
No,
I know, dude.
Well, he's also in favor of Medicare for all. Yeah. So my point is, like, another thing that we could do right now is we could pass a bill that uses a provision in the ACA that allows for Medicare to be expanded to individuals who are either suffering from COVID or have contracted COVID. So because basically there's a provision in there that says if there is an environmental hazard or like some sort of disaster that causes health implications, you could pass or you could expand Medicare for all. Yeah, that was David Dayan from the American Prospect.
Just shows you what we could do with one real lefty in the White House. Like, seriously.
Yeah, no, because technically he could do that through executive order, but he's probably not going to do that through executive order. But my point
no matter what he could do, he's not going to.
But I mean, you could grant state waivers through Congress that would allow different states to enact Medicare for all. So that's another option.
Let me ask Leftward something really quick. Are you for using leverage, but you just aren't for using leverage on something like Medicare for all that will be like a failing vote? Are you saying you prefer if they use leverage to do it in a way that's going to bring like results right now? Is that basically what your argument is? So you're not like against forcing the vote, but you're against the rhetoric surrounding it, and also the idea of using it on a policy that's not going to pass. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely the rhetoric. And also, like, make sure we get substantive concessions right now, whereas that would not be a substantive concession.
And for a NewGenMindset, your goals, can you please state your goals? What do you think the outcomes are going to be for forcing the vote? Because I think we all agree that it's not going to pass in the current climate. So what are your expected outcomes? Do you expect it to have more support for Medicare for all? Do you expect politicians to be more pressured? And then after NewGen gives his answer to that, please, both of you go back at it in your free-form conversation.
Yeah, so I'd flip that entirely on its head, because really everything's presentation when it comes to the narrative. And like it or not, you do, for an effective movement, have to have national leaders, and you have to have people that are carrying that rhetoric. You do. I wanted to touch really quickly, just back on this, when you're talking about Nancy Pelosi getting small dollar donations. It's pretty easy to like funnel money through state PACs that might be coming from corporations, then just have them be in small dollar donations, but a lot of smaller donations. And all I'm saying is just be careful with the numbers, because you can really muddy that stuff and make it seem like you're less corrupt. Not that Hakeem Jeffries is good. I'm not making that point at all.
Not at all. Yeah, a lot worse, actually.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And to be honest with you, I don't know a deep amount about Hakeem Jeffries himself, so I'm not here to make the case that he would be better at all. But what I would say is, listen, anyone, any commentator, even people that are reporters that are in Washington, they probably don't know what would happen if Nancy Pelosi's power was questioned, because that at the end of the day, her ideology revolves on maintaining power, and the status quo aids her to do that. And so the point that I'm making is, if you're ever going to get Medicare for all within the next fucking decade, which, Jesus Christ, you're literally talking about hundreds of thousands of people dying as a result if we don't in the next decade, you got to start now, and you got to start somewhere. So listen, am I saying I have all the answers? God, no. Are you kidding me? None of us have all the answers. What I'm saying is, for example, with Jimmy Dore, I get the point. He's too cynical. He does the comedy aspect with politics. He's a dick sometimes, okay? But at the end of the day, why knock a good idea just because you don't like the guy? That's petty, one. And two, we do have national leaders. I view Nina Turner, for example, honestly, as a stronger leader than Bernie Sanders was.
But she doesn't have any power right now. I mean, that's thing. So
she's running for Congress, but yeah.
Yeah, and if she gets in there, look, I think that could be a game changer, but unfortunately she doesn't have any power right now, and we have to keep that in mind. My entire thing is, so why bring up Jimmy Dore is that unfortunately he does have a lot of influence when it comes to this conversation, outsized influence.
If anything, we should be thanking him, because it's a good idea. I care about ideas, not people and personalities.
I don't think we should be thanking him, just because I think he's created a lot of unnecessary divisions here. Because if he
Dude, I
wanted
was
to
like
be
Cenk Uygur and all those other asshats that like stuck their neck out because they're all
no,
like,
not at all.
"We've been fighting for this for so long, bro." Like it was dumb. It was
Well,
stupid.
no, that wasn't dumb because the thing is, like Jimmy, who hasn't really accomplished anything when it comes to political activism, he is criticizing individuals. So he is taking cheap shots at individuals in the media, individuals in Congress who have actually accomplished real things for the left, right? Have actually built a movement, and he's calling them sellouts. Meanwhile, this has to be pointed out. So this same guy, during the election, presidential election, was like, okay, so Bernie Sanders is the only one who full stop supports Medicare for all. What does he do? He endorses Tulsi Gabbard, who wasn't even in favor of Medicare for all. He endorses her, someone who's pro-torture, someone who co-authored a bill that would ban Muslim immigrants from Syria and Iraq coming to the United States. Okay, so that's who Jimmy Dore endorses. And so for him to claim that he is the one true individual on the left who's not a sellout and all these other individuals are sellouts, that's completely absurd. Okay.
If you were to claim that, I'd agree that would be completely absurd.
But that's his entire thing is his entire thing is he's calling other people sellouts who have accomplished actual things without acknowledging the fact that he.
But he's really not at odds with everyone.
No, but he ended up opposing someone running for president who was the biggest supporter and the co-author of the actual Medicare for all legislation and was a real progressive and not a reactionary when it comes to these issues. Okay. And I think that's, he should acknowledge that, and he would. And another thing, just like with that brand of politics on the left, is that there's way too much emphasis on criticizing Democrats or without acknowledging, for example, that hey, at the end of the day, Mitch McConnell, Republicans, they're the ones who are the biggest ghouls right now.
That's the easy part. That's the easy conversation. Nobody got to say that.
No. But I feel like a lot of people don't actually know that, right? And people need to be informed of that, okay? Because, why was this stimulus? So, I feel like a lot of people truly don't know that the Democrats passed that HEROES Act back in May, right? That was the Republicans blocking it, okay? Or that, for example, in the Senate, sure, Bernie Sanders is great, but you also have Ed Markey and Kamala Harris, who co-authored a bill calling for $2,000 checks, okay? Monthly checks. And so, but that's the thing, there is a big difference between that, even Democrats who might be more centrist versus just your average rank and file Republican who's a complete ghoul when it comes to this stuff and on average doesn't want any relief until Trump said, let's have $2,000 checks. And that's because he's their daddy and they're afraid of him. Right. Yep. And that's an important distinction. That's super important.
No, I agree with you. Trump's awful. Republicans are awful. They've been awful. They were awful under Reagan. It doesn't matter how much bravado or, whatever is over it. They're awful. And they've proven that. I mean, I would say, actually, maybe I wouldn't say this, the greatest president of all time on the Republican aisle. But Dwight D. Eisenhower had some pretty cool things pretty honest, I should say, things to say. They're not cool about the military-industrial complex. Also had the highest marginal tax rates moving out of FDR era. I also wanted to note, I think I called it the Rainbow Coalition, which is still a broad populist, multi-racial campaign the last time I came on. But yeah, it's the New Deal Coalition. And then eventually that actually manifested into...
Just make sure you don't say the New Deal is multiracial because it was made up of really racist people. That's why it was one of the reasons it was so powerful. So I just want to make sure we don't cross those boundaries because they're pretty different things.
Okay, so you're right. There were people that were putting on the face of being New Deal era politicians. And as soon as FDR died and Harry Truman got in power, they flipped real fucking quick. I'm talking about real New Deal era politics. I'm talking about Henry A. Wallace that was arguing for desegregation when he would get fucking laughed out of bar. The same way as I'm arguing for Medicare for all staunchly and to be unapologetic for it, he was doing that for desegregation back then. So no, not everyone in the New Deal, but for you to dismiss the New Deal as a racist time. No shit, it was racist. Okay, times were racist back then. Have you ever picked up a history book from the 1950s or looked at one online? It's insane. But that doesn't mean that there wasn't merit there. That doesn't mean that they weren't highly successful. That doesn't mean they didn't implement policies that actually benefited Americans' lives. But I'll give you that, not equally proportionately via race. No. But no one else was at the time either. It's not like it was just New Deal era Democrats. They were better.
Right. So, I mean, I do think one good thing that could come from that we could learn from the New Deal era is having universal programs. With that being said, Social Security wasn't initially universal because it excluded agricultural and domestic workers, which were disproportionately Black and Latino. Yeah. So
and that's why we got to build on it. I'm not saying the New Deal is the end all be all, but that should be the standard for current politicians. The type of high marginal tax rates we had back then, that should be the standard today. He was arguing for universal healthcare all the way back then.
Yeah, no, and I understand what you're saying there. I mean, even Harry Truman was arguing in favor of universal healthcare, so it's complete atrocity what happened now.
You're just saying it.
Yeah, but anyway, I mean, so it's obviously an important policy, and I think but that's the thing. So right now, that's what I'm saying. So Biden has nominated someone to Health and Human Services who is in favor of Medicare for all. So then why don't we have we should instead be focusing on pushing through Ro Khanna's legislation, which would allow states to set up their own Medicare for all systems. I think that's another policy that should be talked about more right now. And unfortunately, it's not being talked about more. And that's one that's more realistic for getting passed because, I could see even some centrist Democrats saying, okay, this is a compromise at the moment. And that's still better than we have now because potentially, some states might end up getting Medicare for all, and hopefully we can go on from there. Also, that's if we're just talking about the political theater of it all, it kind of puts Republicans on the defensive even more by saying, hey, we're trying to delegate this to the states. Do y'all not care about states' rights and all that stuff? But of course, with Republicans, it's easy to bludgeon them on healthcare because they don't have a policy. Their policy is go ahead and die.
We got a chat from Dragon Slayer. So they said, have we talked about how M4A has a 0% chance of passing the Senate, even if it passes the House? I feel like that's an important factor in deciding whether to force a vote. So I think what they're also saying is if it could pass the Senate with a Democratic majority, would that help forcing the vote, the argument at all? And does the fact that it wouldn't pass the Senate hurt the force the vote argument now?
It doesn't matter where you are. You got end goals, and you try to meet those end goals because that's what you stand for. And if you're in politics for the right reason, and in my view, if you're in journalism for the right reason, it's for those goals. But, and I would like to talk about, because I heard you in that video, Leftward, talk about how you thought that Joe Biden was the most progressive presidential candidate since FDR. But yeah, no, it would certainly get us closer to our end goals if there was a Democratic Senate. Now, in all likelihood, we're not going to get a Democratic Senate. We'll see with these runoffs. But listen, being far away from our goals is even more of a reason to fight for them and fight for them unapologetically. And, again, the polling data, you got to look deeper into it. You were talking about this, Jolah. But listen, the majority of the country supports a universal system. You got to educate people. As much as independent media is small, it is growing. It also is growing. So fight this battle aggressively. Because Trump, for example, knew how to use social media effectively. If we could grow our platforms, we really could have a very dominant presence in a lot of the online, forums and social media sites just talking about these. And I got some news for you. It's the conversation, yes, mainly online because it's COVID times, but it's the conversations we've been having that have now gotten actual progressive representatives to adhere to our demands. You got to let them know what you want because you know what, they serve us at the end of the day. So it's not our definitely not our job to write legislation, but it's our job to let them know what we want them to do. So we got to let them know that. And I actually completely oppose the idea of going to the state level. It's something I've given thought about before. It's also something I've learned about before. And the thing is, it just opens up this muddied mess where you could see for the next 50 years, oh, well, this state moves from a private system to a public system. And then it's kind of the same thing as slave states, man. No, it's just bad. Private health insurance is bad. Abolish health insurance. Get people just from their human being to their doctor. Have there be choice. Have a system that's built off incentivizing, productivity of care, accessibility of care, and quality of care, not money. Get the middleman out.
Leftward, can you comment quick on the media structure because that was brought up a couple of times. I was wondering if you have an ideal vision of where that can go into the future because it is true if there's going to be a theatrical show of some sort, no matter what it is going to be controlled narratively wise by the media, of course. So where do you want to see the media go before we do something like this? What is your ideal place for that? Because I think we all have we know there's a problem obviously with representation. So do you have any ideas about that?
Yeah, so I think what needs to happen, unfortunately, and this is like a hard thing to accomplish, is we need to try to get more progressives on cable news, right? And we need to get more and potentially even create like an actual progressive channel that's on TV that is watched by people who are, for example, over the age of 45, who make up most of the electorate, unfortunately, or people who actually vote.
Facebook.
That's still super important. Facebook is super important, right? Messaging this stuff on Facebook is super important because right now, unfortunately, we're at a moment to where if Barack Obama one day decided to say Medicare for all is horrendous, it's awful. If someone supports Medicare for all, never vote for them, then most Democratic voters, unfortunately, since they love Obama still, right? Like he kind of controls the Democratic Party, they'd listen to him and fall in line. So we have to keep that in mind. All it takes is one Barack Obama saying this is complete bullshit and campaigning against it, and it's kind of dead.
Obama has weight, but I think you're estimating how much weight he has, because you're right, like appearances.
I think we saw in the primary how much weight he has.
Well, no, that's because he has the corporate backing. That's because he made the phone calls.
But he's still really popular. Unfortunately,
but we have
like the most
power.
popular.
When it
but
comes
he's still
to
the most
narratives, Obama doesn't really create the narratives. In fact, Trump creates narratives more than Obama.
Well, Obama creates the narratives for Democratic voters, unfortunately. Like he's still the most popular president, and also just like politician in general, a former politician within like actual within the Democratic Party. So that's just important to keep in mind. Like people who
genuine left, I think it only makes sense to oppose both Biden and Obama because their policies are not in line with ours.
Oh, no. I agree with opposing them, but I also think right now, if we're talking about what has the biggest chance of passing, what has the biggest chance of not creating a media narrative against us, but actually helping people's lives, I think obviously like making sure that Pelosi removes Richie Neal as head of Ways and Means is super important because that's more low stakes for her. Because it's like, hey, like we'll support you. You just have to take this cretin out of this position. You know what I mean? And after a while, like she would concede there, and that would lead to important gains in the future. And also why I'm saying we should, for the moment, also push Ro Khanna's bill to grant waivers to states to set up their own Medicare for all systems is because at the end of the day, that is more likely to also get support at the moment from Democrats who aren't progressives, and that would substantially help people's lives. That's so much better than what we have right now. And honestly, that's probably even better than a public option, depending on how many states are granted those waivers. So what I'm saying is,
I'd fight for that too.
But that's tangible, right? Whereas forcing the votes, it's symbolic. Symbolism is important. No, I mean, it is, unfortunately.
Okay, so you're saying them saying no and not voting for Nancy Pelosi and her not getting reapproved. I thought that was actually had a lot of implications on the inside. That's not just performative or whatever. That's actual change in the system. Now, it would cause a disarray. I'm not saying it would be all great.
I mean, here's my issue with that. So right now, I've heard this critique on the left saying, well, just because someone ostensibly supports Medicare for all doesn't mean they actually support it. Just make them vote on it, right? Then we'll know for sure. Okay. And that sounds fair, right?
That's how you really know.
However, if you know it's not going to pass, if you know that Biden's going to veto it, then they could easily just be like, okay, yeah, we'll vote in favor of it now. We'll know we'll die in the Senate, and then the narrative will be Medicare for all dies.
It's in the Senate now, son. If it passes in the House, fuck yeah. That's literally winning, right? Like, okay, you're right. And then it would probably get struck down in the Senate, and then you know what?
Struck down, and it's like Medicare for all dies. Huh?
Yeah, no, it is. You're absolutely right. I was trying to remember a point that I had. But I didn't actually watch your episode here, Jolah. The one you did yesterday, but I heard you basically talking about, or I saw the thumbnail for it. You were talking about like Kalinsky and like forced to vote, and you didn't like it. And I think you were talking about Destiny. So I got a question for you guys. Had Destiny and Vosh or whoever you guys kind of like affiliate and, you know, like your favorite YouTubers, like, come on, we're all humans here. Had they come up with the idea, would you be more for it? Like, just, you know, keep it real.
Really quick, they probably wouldn't do that, but if they did do that, I don't really like you tagged me on a Twitter saying, look, Ilhan Omar said something about bringing Medicare for all up to a vote. I don't really like care what they do exactly, because I think like I have foundational reasons why I don't think it's a good idea based on data. based on approval ratings for Pelosi, based on my own experience talking to Democratic
That's
voters.
lower than Trump.
Well, it's 70% in the Democratic Party, which matters when we're trying to take over the Democratic Party, which is the point I was making to you.
100%.
It's hard just because, and one thing I want to ask both of you about, before we get to these chats, these new chats, I wanted to say, how would you go about talking to a Democratic voter that is really happy about Pelosi's leadership? They love Biden, they love Obama, and they think Bernie's pretty cool. And they prefer a public option to Medicare for all. But, they think Medicare for all might work, but they have good insurance right now, and they would prefer to keep their private plans. Like, how would both of you approach that? Because no matter what, we all agree we need to sell this idea. So what are your different strategies for that?
Is it okay if I go first?
Sure, go ahead.
I would say, well, first, that's going to be an enlightenment in situation. If you're the first one that's going to be telling them about NSA mass spying, and I'll leave it there, but I could keep going. But no, what you tell them is, listen, we're going to expand your choice of healthcare. We're not going to do anything to your healthcare. You're thinking about your insurance, and this is a very specific way that the media phrases it for this point, right? They have you convinced your insurance is your healthcare. If you just cut the unnecessary insurance middleman that price gouges you and charges you premiums out of the middle, and you have a single payer system, you have it as a human right, and it costs less, which are shown in all the recent studies. So really, I would actually do it in a very not like coming at them. There's no point in like trying to be like, you're wrong and here's why you're wrong. Just come at them with the facts. There's no denying that if you have a profit incentivized healthcare system, then the healthcare system is going to try to make money. Duh, type stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, I would tell them that right now, things such as premiums, co-pays, deductibles, those are all basically private taxes. We just don't think of them as taxes, right? And that they're completely, and I'm like, and they're completely unnecessary for you to receive healthcare. I'm going to say that right now, some of the top-rated healthcare systems in the world where you don't have any medical bankruptcies are the UK or Canada, which have different versions of a single payer healthcare system, right? In fact, even other systems that don't have single payer, they also don't have medical bankruptcies, and we do have medical bankruptcies, right? And that would still exist even under a public option, right? And I would also bring up the fact that public options are not that great, because I was reading, for example, Medicare for America, which is the Beto O'Rourke's plan for the primary, and that's I think that's also in the House or in the Senate, but that's like the go-to public option legislation right now. And the issue there is that if you're making around like a little over $75,000 a year as a family, you're still going to have premiums of $5,000, okay, $5,000 a year, and that's still a lot of money, and you would not have any premiums under Medicare for all. And I would also just make the arguments that, we have more than enough money. We can reallocate more than enough money to pay for this. And also, like, for example, we would have to slightly raise the payroll taxes, but just make the argument that a slight rate, because I think it's important to be honest with them the way Bernie was honest in the primary, but just saying that like a slight bump in the payroll tax is like versus like you no longer have to worry about premiums, copays, and deductibles. You're saving a lot of money there, and so those are the main arguments I would make.
This is a really simple one that I've actually kind of been pondering like how to really phrase recently, but there's this big demagoguing that the wait times will go up in our healthcare system. But if you think about it, the current profit incentivized system means that where do they get the majority of their money? By making you stay the extra night, by making you get the extra like x-ray, I'll use as an example, or whatever, that you don't necessarily really need. So if anything, with a system like that, you're going to have people in beds when they don't necessarily really need to be in beds because they know that they can charge them more if they're in beds. And at the end of the day, a health care system's competence in terms of if its organization or lack of organization under the ACA, right? Its infrastructure, and then also its funding programs are going to be the actual driving factors for wait times. And in fact, we could lower wait times with Medicare for all.
Yeah, and then also, I mean, just bringing up that you can still get elective procedures under, your private health insurance, even if you do have Medicare for all, because any other system that even in the UK, which has, the NHS system, it's more of a government run system where even the doctors are government employees, you still have elective procedures that you can get through private health insurance. And I think that would actually ease people's minds. They're saying, okay, so the stuff that's an emergency, I won't get gouged for that.
Yes.
But for elective procedures, that's still an option.
Like braces or whatever, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like if you need braces. Yeah.
Yeah, or like plastic surgery. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Because I don't want to pay for that.
Exactly.
Sorry.
All right, so you guys basically agree on how to sell it. So, okay, I got a couple more chats to go through. I don't want to keep you guys too long. So this is more of a thing you both will disagree on. So, I think this is Spencer said, instead of useless Medicare for all vote, let's instead use the squads and Justice Dems to hold up votes unless Joe Biden strengthens public option. A well-run and cheap public option will lead to single payer. So I think you disagree with that last part. But the one I want to focus on is considering Biden's current silence on the public option, would it be more favorable to force a public option vote instead? Because that would hold Biden's feet to the fire on that policy that he's been chanting about the past 2 years. So what do you guys think about that? Who wants to go first?
So with that, what I would say is you should still try passing through Kanda's legislation, because that's still better than a public option, more comprehensive than a public option, and it sets the groundwork for Medicare for all. Now, if that fails, then you end up going for a public option, because that's what we're left with at the moment with Biden as president, and that's better than the status quo. So that's how I'd approach that.
Yeah, I'd say flank that son of a bitch. I mean, by your own logic, if pressuring him on a public option is pressure, then pressuring him on Medicare for all is even more pressure. So yes, flank that son of a bitch.
Yeah. To be fair though, to clarify, I wouldn't say, put all your effort on Medicare for all, because that's not happening under Biden no matter what, especially if there's a good chance. There's also a good chance that Biden is not going to even seek re-election to begin with. There have been talks within his circle of him being a one-term president, so I won't have to worry about re-election. He wanted to be president and he got that. Congratulations.
Yeah.
So
I don't mean to steer this off track, but I just wanted to know, did you guys see the reporting that basically Biden was kind of secretly part of the negotiations, or at least had representatives that were representing him in the negotiations, and his top dollar was 600. He was saying 600 or less, man. So what's that say about our good old president, Uncle Joe? Or soon to be?
I read that. I think it was in the New York Times, and it doesn't surprise me that much. I think Joe Biden himself is a product of disastrous austerity politics. However, I do think that once he's in office, I think a lot of his cabinet picks have been to the left of anyone that we had under Obama, and the actual situation is going to force him to move left. I'm also sure he'll get pressure within more centrist Democrats, people like Kamala Harris, right? She'll probably run in 2024 saying to him hey, unless we actually do something, that's really going to hurt me when I try to become president. So
yeah. Well, question, what's your best case scenario? If you, and I know this is a hard question, but if you could give me just 3 things that you're no, we could get Biden on, we could get him on it. We could legalize marijuana I think one is plausible, and that's the best case scenario. But what are your other best case scenarios?
So probably canceling student debt up
No,
to...
you already said you won't do that, dude.
No, well, okay, here's the thing. I think that's going to be a real battle because he said he's willing to cancel up to 10,000, right? And he can do that through executive order. Technically, he could cancel as much as he wanted to under executive order because the Department of Education has that authority, right? But Schumer, right? And Schumer is no progressive. Schumer is no lefty, right? Schumer, in fact, is to the right of Pelosi, I'd say. He said, he was saying, Biden, I want you to cancel up to $50,000 in student loan debt. So I think that's going to be a pretty big battle moving ahead, because people like Schumer, they want to remain in power, and he's probably thinking hey, we could do this, you could do this. Doesn't require the Republicans. So I think that's a big one.
Yeah, well, and it's funny, Chuck Schumer, for example, I've seen here within the last few months, he's I'm totally on board to legalize weed now, guys. So yeah, no, you can see seriously though that the progressive campaign that was ran in 2020, despite its faults, it definitely shifted the Overton window. And we know how important that is and how long drawn of a battle that is. So whenever people are you're not going to get it, they're not going to vote yes on it. I'm you guys either don't know anything about political power or you don't want to fight for it. That.
Yeah.
I don't know where's the middle ground. Where's the middle ground, especially you, Jolah? Where do you sit where you see it being a necessity that we have healthcare as a human right, but you don't want to fight for it and leverage votes?
I told you before, I see a different way in fighting for it. I don't think it always needs to be something like this. Just because you're not ramming 100% forward all the time doesn't mean you're not fighting for it. Because I look at it like I use the stupid analogy of a boxing match. Like, you don't go into a boxing match and just swing for haymakers, or you're probably going to get knocked out. I see it as a more disciplined approach. When I see this, I don't want to give the media the story. Like I said before, the support isn't there for it. Like, my ideal for doing something like this, like forcing the vote, would be that even the most moderate Democrats, the most Pelosi-loving Democrats, majority pick Medicare for all over a public option when they have the choice. That's what I want to see, and I also want to see more progressive media. I'm not even kidding about this, by the way. If there was one person, like one big media center on like, I know there's normie, like really centrist stuff like BuzzFeed and like whatever the Huffington Post.
Vox?
Yeah, Vox and stuff are on Facebook. But if we had some actual progressive power on Facebook, I feel like that would do so much for this fight, because not only are there like obviously right wing like Republican boomers on there, but it's also all the Pelosi Democrats are also on Facebook. So I think the weakness on Facebook is one of the biggest issues.
Who's the biggest on Facebook right now on the left wing circle? It's probably Klinsky. Let's keep it real.
Facebook, I don't see anybody other than Crowder, Shapiro,
I don't see anything.
and I get recommended only left wing stuff.
I've seen him get like 100,000 views on Facebook, but you know,
the big person on the left, I think this is someone who's very effective, to be honest, in talking to that audience, is Robert Reich. Because he actually has more likes on Facebook, I think, than Shapiro and Crowder and a lot of really famous right wingers. And I think like he makes these arguments in a way, and this is super important when it comes to messaging. All right, I think attacking the Democratic Party too much, attacking Pelosi too much, right, and using Jimmy Dore methods, I really don't think that's effective, because the thing is, a lot of these people, they do have a loyalty to the Democratic Party. I know we don't like it. I don't like it, but that unfortunately is a reality right now. So in order to convert them, I think it's better to make an argument saying like, hey, what Bernie Sanders, what AOC, what they're advocating for, that's similar to what LBJ or FDR were advocating for. And that's when the Democratic Party was its most successful. Like, these are the true Democrats right now. And I think like using that framing is important when talking to those audiences. So
I think it's important that you keep more or less like the fuel to the fire. You know what I'm saying? In terms of don't be unapologetic, especially when it's just like, if it's corruption, call it corruption. Don't call it anything else. You know what I'm saying? That type of framework. But I agree with you that you have to do strategical critiques, because if you hit them on the wrong things, then you know that's probably just not going to land with the American masses. But then when you ask me, okay, well, what would land? What genuine opposition lane to both political parties that you could run within the Democratic Party would land? And I think primarily that it honestly is Medicare for all. I think a UBI, now especially considering the bipartisan agreement on UBI, do Medicare for all, UBI, debt, cancel student loan debt, and then in the same piece of legislation, make that the piece of legislation that says no, state universities are state universities, we're not going to give them your taxpayer dollars while they also price gouge you for tuition. So it's not even all about Medicare for all. Like, will I die on this hill? Am I willing to argue with anyone on this point? Yes. You know why? Because, man, and I'm sure you guys might be too, I'm still on my parents' healthcare plan. That's a scary thought. I moved out 6 months ago. It's a scary thought to not have healthcare as a human right. And seriously, like, listen, I don't want to make this about Dore, and I haven't even brought up this point on my channel. I'm going to make it here because, like, it matters, guys. We're humans. Jimmy Dore literally almost died, and he went through medical bankruptcy because of our incompetent healthcare system. So who is the authoritative voice that says, oh, he's not qualified enough or whatever?
Look, and I feel bad for him when it comes to that, and no one should have to go through that, right? It's inhumane, it's cruel, and it's a disgusting system.
It probably makes you lash out, which is what he's doing.
I understand that. However, at the end of the day, you have to keep in mind that what he's doing just isn't effective. And honestly, just attacking people on the left, especially, because I just saw him, like attacking like David Sirota or Cenk Uygur.
Yeah, that hurt my heart, dude, on all sides.
No, but I'm saying is a lot of those people, especially Sirota in his Jacobin piece, and like I've been obviously bringing up a lot of those proposals right now, like that's tangible stuff. And Sirota, like, that means he's expanding the conversation, looking at things that are more likely to happen than Medicare for all passing right now, right? While saying, like, look, force the vote, like getting a vote on Medicare for all, it's still something that we should do, but we shouldn't put all of our eggs in that basket, right? I think like he's expanding the conversation, looking at other solutions, other ways to help people's lives, because ultimately that's what politics should be about if you're in it for the right reasons, is helping people's lives. And the way you do that depends on the political context, unfortunately. And so I think that it's important to expand this conversation. My issue is whenever someone like Dor or others who I've seen on the Twitterverse or whatever, they don't expand the conversation. They fixate on force the votes and don't look at other methods that have a bigger chance of passing and actually helping people's lives right now.
So I agree with you that like people should offer nuance, because it's like, well, come on, you can think of something or another. Like, just give us something. You don't even have to be right, but just try. But I do want to also note again, I did earlier, that effective reiteration of especially, you know, like snappy lines or whatever made by your national leaders leads you to victory. And I know this is kind of like a random ass, you know.
But at the end of the day, like, I have to say this. Look, at the end of the day, all that stuff, I mean, verbal quips are great, one-liners are great, but at the end of the day, I'm going to keep it real. Whoever is chairing Ways and Means, right, whether or not we pass those Medicare for All waivers, who the Health and Human Services Secretary is, that's more important, because that's actual power. That actually affects people's lives.
That is actually power.
We have, as a society, we do have amnesia, right? We have political amnesia. And so, sure, like, oh, AOC said something that owns someone, or, oh, we forced the vote and Pelosi looked bad. If that doesn't lead to anything tangible, then people will forget about that within a week, and then it'll be done with, because that's our news cycle right now. That's the way we operate when it comes to politics.
but see, that's why you gotta have something that's strong and blows that shit
yeah,
up.
No, I know, but what I'm saying is, like, you can only do so much of that, but if it doesn't lead to institutional change, it doesn't matter, because institutional change, that's what can last forever, as we've seen, right? That's how we have these people in leadership. But like having just, you know, all these like this verbal sparring, verbal fencing, that only does so much. It only lasts for like a news cycle, and then we're done with it.
All right, guys. Just 1 second. Thank you both for doing this. So I'm going to give you both a chance to give like your final roundup of the entire conversation, what your argument was, what you ended up, you know, getting from the conversation. Do you agree on certain things and disagree on other things and stuff like that? There's one more chat from Spencer. I think that's going at NewGen a little bit. Klobuchar didn't say 2K checks were an attack on Americans. That is true. She is really dumb for how she said it, but she did say the stimulus bill not being signed by Trump was an attack, which, by the way, I don't know if you guys saw, he officially signed it. Like right now, those $600 checks. So that's really interesting. And they also said Joe Biden, of course, negotiated 600. That's all Mitch would do. Dumb Twitter lefty added again. So if you want to respond to that, you can. And then we'll go to final statements.
That's pretty funny. I mean, yeah, no, I was like, yeah, of course, she was talking in context about the entire COVID bill. I'm sorry, what was the second part again? I got caught up.
Joe
on the
Biden, of course, negotiated 600. That's all Mitch would do. Dumb Twitter lefty added again.
Okay, so why don't you, I don't know, propose $2,000? Maybe he cracks on 1,200. Maybe he doesn't. Maybe you only get 600, but at least you fought the fight. And that's the same response. Listen, I understand how important the waivers are. I understand how important the appointment to Health and Human Services are, and getting certain, getting certain seats on certain commissions. I understand that stuff, and we should fight towards that stuff. And that's what the insider's job is in Congress. Now, listen, you could make a case that they haven't been aggressive enough on the inside, okay? But regardless of that, we have a duty on the outside too. And we get to control where the country goes via the bully pulpit. And so, listen, when I express these ideas, listen, you think I don't realize that there's going to be a lot of people that think, oh, he's, got his head in the clouds, pie in the sky. That's fine. Because before any real movement of change, like you were talking about, Leftward, institutionally, they said the same thing about the same guy. So,
yeah.
All right. So both of you, whichever one wants to go first, you could do like a couple minutes, whatever you want to say. Do you want to go first, Leftward, since he just talked for a while?
Yeah, I'll actually just close it out there.
Sure. Yeah, I'll just go over here. So my entire thing is, at the end of the day, like, we have to keep in mind, like I said earlier, that all this rhetoric that's happening primarily online doesn't matter when it comes to the electoral landscape. It doesn't matter when it comes to tangible policy change. Why pushing for something such as getting a progressive on Ways and Means, getting the waivers for Medicare for all so states can institute it, even pressuring Biden to expand the part of the ACA which allows for the expansion of Medicare for all and is more realistic? Why that's important is because that creates an institutional framework to where we can get this real change. And then once we have more progressives in Congress, hopefully once we have an actual progressive, a Bernie Sanders type as presidents, then we have a foundation for getting the real deal. But if we fall asleep at the wheel, if we bicker on BS that doesn't really matter right now under Biden, right? Because the entire idea is under a Biden administration, we should use that to build up as much of a solid foundation as possible. Because on Trump, you're always on defense. Because under Trump, like, you have to worry about him destroying USPS, right? Like, you have to worry about him taking away DACA. So you're always on the defensive. Under Biden, we have to build as much of a foundation as possible. So that way we can get what we need once we have progressives controlling all levels of government. And another thing, one final point, is keeping in mind that right now we need to understand that Pelosi isn't the worst, unfortunately. There are Democrats who are to the right of her, like Hakeem Jeffries, her successor, who would most likely become speaker if she weren't speaker, because progressives do not have the votes right now in the House. We have to keep that in mind. And that's a risk that you have to understand that, like, that is a risk you're taking, okay? And most likely you won't get your way when it comes to who will be the next speaker.
Yeah, off the bat on that specific vote. But so the only thing that I would note, and I agree, you know, like last time I came on here, I said that I actually prefer more direct action, going and protesting at these representatives' house, you know, having like a genuine populist organized protests around our national leaders. What I'd say, though, is despite that, the online public pressure campaign that has coalesced here in the last, maybe it's even 2 weeks now. But either way, I mean, clearly we got Jamal Bowman and we got Cori Bush pondering the idea. We got Ilhan Omar on our side. So listen, it's not saying we're successful yet, but we're trying as hard as we can. And I stay pretty stern in my position.
Yeah, so thank you both again for doing this entire thing. I saw Leftward, you haven't posted to your channel in a while. I don't know if you'll want this VOD in order to use to post it or not, but
yeah, no, I haven't posted in a while because things got busy, especially with grad school. I'm just trying to recover now during
okay,
the
well,
break.
someone just said, okay, DJ just chatted, can we get a Dickie McGee's axe from NGM?
Dude, I think that word's hilarious, and I 100% totally know that Kyle Kalinske came up to it. I don't give a goddamn Dickie McGee's axe about Joe Biden or Nancy
Yeah, that's
Pelosi.
pretty
And
funny.
they also said, please stop acting like FDR's New Deal was a progressive utopia.
No, not a utopia, just better than what was before.
Yeah, I think a lot of progressives do. Okay, I
Come on,
don't.
guys.
When you talk
Stop
about the
trying to
New
take pot
Deal,
shots, bro. Fight me
I
IRL.
think talking about the New Deal in a way that's like a utopia can be good for convincing people. Like if you say to a Democrat, like, it was so good back there, we need to do this again, that could definitely work. But of course, if we do like a historical evaluation, we shouldn't be glossing over like everything. We should be going into like.
And you know, I only have so much time to go through it. But
Yeah, sure.
at the end of the day, it's not about being creating a utopia around it. Just pointing out obvious things like, hey, Social Security, the thing you get more out of than you pay into, and your employer has to get the other half. Yeah, FDR did that, and that's kind of the most popular American program, or one of them. I don't know the current.
I think we should say to older voters, and this is obvious, is that FDR's New Deal, that's just the necessary transition to a Marxist utopia. And I think no, I'm kidding.
All right, plug both of your channels, your social medias. I'll put your Twitter inside the chat right now, both of yours.
Yeah. All I can say is Leftward, keep making videos, bro, because I like your shit and I'm gonna check it out. So you best not stop.
All right. I mean, I won't. It'll be, sporadic, but here and there.
All right, Leftward is in the chat, and I'll put NewGen in a second. All right, well, thank both of you. I guess I'll drag you out now.